must be on our way.
Okay. Do you want me to type them?
Yes, please.
And are you using paper ballot?
I'm going to use the online ballot. I just wanted to make sure I got the speaker ready.
Okay.
Oh, I think he's willing to.
Oh,
if he wants.
Further on start, can you ask if all debaters consent to?
Yeah, I can.
Thanks.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Solbridge NEAO 2017. My name's AJ Carver. I'll be your chair. Joining me on the panel are Sloan and Yuto. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Before we go further, this debate is being recorded. Does everyone consent, or are there any objections? Yeah, okay, so the opposition whip prefers not to be recorded. Besides that, everyone's okay? Okay. Speeches are 7 minutes in length. First and last minute are protected. You'll hear a signal at 1 minute, a signal at 6 minutes, 2 signals at 7. Please don't speak longer than 7:15. We won't record what you're saying then. I encourage all teams to offer and to accept points of information. Are there any questions? Okay. If not, I call this House to order and invite the Prime Minister to speak on the motion, this House believes progressive movements should not dox. Hear, hear.
Ladies and gentlemen, so the progressive movement we're talking about are like against racial discrimination, movement of feminism, or gay right movement, or those movements that support liberal ideas. And the doxing we're talking about is actively searching and searching and propagandizing identifiable personal information on the internet. And in this list, we see that people who are opposed to those liberal ideas, or who are opposed to the progression or advancement of those progressive movement, are actually being retaliated by several individuals who are extreme, but they also claim that they belong to those kind of progressive movement body or organization, right? So. The criteria in this debate of our OG is that whether it is good for the advancement of progressive movements and also the relevant organization, right? So, later in my speech, I'll tell you why it is principally unjustified for those progressive movements or organizations to dox. And secondly, why on a practical level it is better to use logic persuasion and how it harms those conservative groups or the general public to be more supportive in terms of their movement, and how it is actually undermining the legitimacy of progressive movements themselves, right? So firstly, we believe that doxing itself is not principally justified in the first place. We believe it is actually a violation of right of privacy of certain of individual, right? Because first of all, there are actually no consent of those individuals whose personal information is spread out throughout the internet, and it is accessible to all people. So and secondly, who are these people, right? What these people are we are talking about? These people are usually the people who belongs to the conservative group like white supremacy or like 3KK, this kind of group, right? It is even though we say the group they're in might not be necessarily good, or the value they're supporting might not be good, but still at the very least place, right? We still should respect their right of privacy, and it's extremely harmful because there are two scenarios, right? Firstly, the leakage of information of those individuals can be exposed to those to retaliation of certain extreme people who belongs to those progressive organization or movements. And secondly, the leakage of information can be also used by other people for other criminal offenses,
Sorry?
yeah.
And do you support Donald Trump conservative sides being name-shaming minorities and LGBTQ in their ideology?
So basically, we are so things. The thing is that we are banning doxing, the leakage of personal information, and I don't think your appeal actually is relevant to this debate, right? So moving on a practical level, right? Firstly, we believe that doxing is undermining the legitimacy of progressive movement, right? Firstly, we think that progressive movement itself is a righteous kind of movement. It fights for universal rights, equality, those stuff. It is showing a bright image. It should show the bright side of those movements to the public. But when this kind of movement use doxing to try to persuade other people, use potential violation of those individual who belongs to the opposite group, to harm their basic right. We think it is actually illegitimate to the movement, and it is extremely harmful to the movement itself. Even if there are only several extreme individuals who actually carry out those physical harm using the information exposed by the doxing information on the internet, it is already detrimental enough for those progressive movement to advance further, because the harming because the physical harm, the tangible harm, enforced to those certain people who belongs to the opposite movement are already harmed, and it is actually creating a bad social image for those progressive movement, and this is actually making the value or the propaganda of those progressive movement even less persuasive in the long run, right? So which makes me continue to the second argument. But before I move on, yeah.
Okay, then, given all of your cases, if you are going to concede that extreme conservatives sometimes block the progression of those liberal movements, what is your model to actually make those liberal movements to be much better on your side?
This is exactly what I'm going to talk about, right? So we believe that using physical harm to harm those people who belongs to white supremacy or those extremist group, it is actually not a right way to persuade those conservative extreme group to believe in your liberal ideas or what. What we believe is that we should use logical persuasion, verbal persuasion, to really persuade those conservative extremists to believe in your values, to believe in your ideas, right? Even if they don't really, they cannot really believe in your ideas, cannot follow your ideas. At least you can gain the respect of other people, because you're not really harming other people physically or tangibly, right? So comparatively speaking, right, we still have a marginal benefit, because it is more likely that we can persuade the people on the middle ground to really believe in your ideas, who could have not believed our ideas because of your illegitimate use of doxing information under the opposition side, right? So based on all these things, we are so proud to propose.
Thank the Prime Minister for that speech and invite the Leader of Opposition.
speak, social movement is only valuable when it can actually trigger real changes and actually persuade the middle ground. The problem of the opening government in this debate is that they just simply merely assert the kind of mechanism that they want to stand for. Simply saying that logical explanation and logically persuading the far right individuals, as they said, the KKKs, the far conservatives, is going to suddenly change the situation. We think there needs a more explanation than that. I'm going to tell you why their case is also faulty throughout my speech. Our argument coming from the opening opposition is going to be that we need this kind of doxing in order to further persuade and trigger those middle grounds to actually have interest towards those progressive movements in the first place. And secondly, we're going to also tell you about why our side helps the moderate conservatives who are currently being represented and being stigmatized as if all of the conservatives are radical. We think that that kind of distinction between the moderate and the extreme is only beneficial in coming from our side of the house, and that is the benefit coming from the opening opposition. Rebuttals. Firstly, the Prime Minister is so much concerned about the leakage of privacy. We're going to bite the bullet. Yes, leakage of privacy do exist, but the question here is whether that in of itself is good or bad. We say that it is actually worth to leak the privacy of those few individuals who hinder the general development and the progression of the society. If, on our side, if we prove that kind of societal change happens, we think that the worry is somehow mitigated and is very much marginal. Second, about the persuading those through logical explanation. It is really irony because they said that the kind of people that we're going to dox in this debate are the KKK and the conservatives. Fact of the matter is those people don't care about any of even the best logical explanations and the persuasion coming from the liberals. They hate each other. That is why they're not going to be persuaded in the first place. Furthermore, it is also funny when they suddenly just jump the logic and saying that this is going to somehow persuade the middle ground. Simply say, we think it is an assertion on their side to just simply say that somehow speaking to these far-right conservatives with the logical reasoning of the liberals is going to somehow trigger the middle ground. We think this is an assertion that second speaker hopefully talks about. Given that, what is going to be our contribution in this debate? First of all, what is the social movement, the progressive movement that we're talking about? Opening government talks about this is somewhat liberal, but we're going to add more on that. We said that the question is, the core crux of those liberal movement is that they continuously question the kind of the society and the status quo that they're living in, and they also try to hinder those kind of far-right conservatives from actually hindering and bashing off those kind of movements. In order to do that, we agree that middle ground also need to support you in any kind of social movement. But notice that those kind of liberal movements, in the most of the cases, are likely to be the comparatively social minorities. They are most likely in those cases the kind of the homosexual movement, the feminist movement. It all started as a marginal movement within a society. In those instances, we think that provoking the citizen sentiment is necessary, and we're going to do that through doxing. How does this happen? First of all, we said that we bite the bullet and say even if it is extreme, we think that those kind of one or two extreme actions is what provokes the society in the middle ground to actually have an interest in looking into what kind of things are happening in the status quo. This has been historically and socially proven through this instances such as the Me Too movement or the hashtag Me Too or Yes You Are Racist. There are criticisms that those are somewhat extreme, but nevertheless it is those extreme movements and the revealing of the privacy of those individuals who bashed off the liberals, and that is how people actually came to question what kind of morality problems are happening in the status quo. But furthermore, okay, yes.
So even if they're extremists like KK, they still have children family who are innocent, right? Do you think it's justified for you to risk their safety due to your exposure of doxing?
I think you're pulling a really tricky line here. One hand, you say that we're doxing about those extreme, and now you're talking about those some people who are moderate conservatives. Of course, we're not going to dox those individuals. We think that is not the kind of people that we have to defend. In the end, we say that you need to trigger the people to be interested, and that is when you actually question. Another problem coming from their side of the house is that individuals like Donald Trump or any other extreme organizations that are appealing to the public, but the public just simply have no idea about what kind of affiliation does those individuals have and what kind of occupation do they have in the society. By actually revealing those informations to the public, we say that people can now finally start to question about what does this occupation mean and how did this occupation lead to those individuals and organizations talking about those extreme conservative ideas. We think that the spark and the triggering of those questions is important in this debate, and that's the unique contribution coming from our side of the house. Why is this good? First of all, it prevents the immoral and extreme conservatives from bashing off those ideas of the liberalism. The reason why this is comparatively beneficial is that whatever the best possible scenario coming from their side of the house does not prevent those kind of things. That is to say, their methods are at best mitigatory and punitive. On the other hand, we tell you that we provoke fear even under worst case scenario. That is to say, if you as a far right-wing conservative dare to bash out to the liberal ideas through illogical explanations, you now need to bear the consequences of your identity being revealed. That is to say, we think that comparatively, we provide more incentives for those far-right conservatives to actually not put off those emotional and illogical right-wing posts on the internet or also in the society. Furthermore, secondly, it distinguishes between the real moderate conservatives and the extreme conservatives. The reason why this is significantly important in this debate is because we agree and we welcome the opinions of the moderate conservatives and the healthy criticism on those liberals. Problem is that in the general society right now, because of the rise of those extreme conservatives like the Donald Trump or something, or the kind of people that were on the Yes, You're a Racist movement, those kind of people are seen as if they're the representative of the conservatives and the society is preserving them as so. That is to say, even those conservatives, their voice, moderate voice, the logical things that they love so much, is not being heard. By actively distinguishing those two, we think that moderate conservatives can now have a leverage to say, those people are not conservatives and they are different from us. We think that in those essences, the progression of the society can happen furthermore because even on those liberal movements, we accept that you need healthy conservative criticism if necessary. Social movement does not happen when you have extreme people which they fail to actually prevent. We say that we are the ones who give you more progression. Very proud to oppose.
Thank the Leader of Opposition for that speech. And I invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, we do believe today I think the PO has to come up with more detailed explanation. How by people knowing the name and address of a particular person, how by who he or she has dinner with, who or she is doing afterward, is actually contributing to have some interest to that movement, right? So we do not think this kind of information, it will trigger people's interest in the first place, right? And moreover, we think we think the social movement actually has we do believe social movement need to attract people's attention, right? But it's not by exposing the kind of private information. If the doxing is the only way for social organization, a progressive movement to attract people's attention, and we think this kind of social movement will actually fail, right? So moreover, and we do believe it's like Emma was it's like I think that there are a lot of alternatives that exist nowadays that is not completely nothing opposite, right? Because the social movement can find a very great celebrity like Emma Watson to publicly announce their ideas, to publicly promote their ideas. They can ask economist writers to write some articles to promote their own ideas. But we do believe the essence of social progressive movement to promote the ideas is not based on the suffering of the people of the other party, right? Because what my partner has already illustrated to you is that the suffering is actually existing nowadays, right? Because they are now violating their privacy. They are now using the unreliable resources that you find on the internet and used in a very deliberately deliberately handcrafted way to handcraft the information, to use that information, which can be sometimes normally exaggerated, can be normally untrue to the public. We think this kind of attack is already the suffering of the other right party, right? So moreover, we think there are already people that within the organization, within the social progressive movement, right, that deliberately use that kind of information. They are going to take the image of the progressive movement that you want to illustrate to the public. They are going to have some retaliation to the people that they dox with. We think this kind of harm is harm not only to the person whether they prove legitimate or not. We think this harm already exists under our paradigm. What we do believe is more problematic under our paradigm. We think they are actually undermining the legitimacy of the social progressive movement, right? Because first, my partner has already told you it's actually illegitimate in the first place. And moreover, we think what we illustrate to the public of the social progressive movement is that if a feminism movement want to attract people's attention, they have to reveal some private information of another person in order to gain attention, right? So we do believe there are already other ways for feminist mobilization, for gay right movement to gain attention to begin with. But moreover, when they are using this kind of bad information, they are actually illustrating a bad image from the bad image to the society. And why are this kind of bad image are so harmful, right? Because, ladies and gentlemen, when the feminists want to fight for their right, when the gay right movement want to fight their right, they are already representing their ideas as a minority, right? So when they are publicly attack another guy from another group, it's like a black. When the gay right movement is public attack one who likes boy and girl anyway, attack another girl, it's going to be regarded as an attack from the minority to the majority. We think this kind of attack with the identity tag is even more harmful. The people will regard this as a retaliation from the minority to the majority when they are already in a position that they are less represented, when they are already in the minority. They should focus their attention not on the doxing, but on promoting their ideas, but not on the suffering of other people. And we do not want the social misunderstanding to a progressive program. And moreover, what we do believe, and yes, come lower. Oh yes, you.
And can you prove why this progressive movement especially needs that especially high moral high ground compared to any kind of social movement in the status quo?
Yes. Progressive movement, like I told you, it's like the race discrimination, it's like the feminism, it's like the gay right movement, right? So we do believe any social movement actually has to obey the legitimacy of any legal procedures, right? And moreover, we do not see by exposing this kind of doxing, it's so compulsory, it's so urgent to promoting their own ideas. No. So I think the difference between the progressive movement and normal social movement, right, is that progressive movement actually need more recognition from public when they are already in the minority. What the opposition is trying to do is trying to distract people's attention from the progressive movement to what the progressive movement is actually doing some unreliable and attacking on the people, right? So we do believe when the public perception to the progressive movement become from promoting females' rights by pushing and attacking the men, we see it's actually detrimental for the progressive movement to promote their own ideas, right? So the opposition is actually illustrating a very amusing image, right? So imagine if Emma was on a United Nations Assembly, they are going to promote their ideas by using the negative examples from the other party. So we think it's not going to be convincing, right? So we do believe that yes.
Name me one social movement that was loved by the entire public and even catered to the desires and the requirements of the opposition group.
Well, we do not actually know what your POI actually want to talk about. But I would want to say the social movement, the main purpose of social movement is not based on exposing, on harming others. The main purpose of the social movement is by persuading the rest of the public. So when the opposition want to talk about the idea, they are going to stop the far right people from exposing some emotional ads on the internet. On the internet, we believe it's actually no, because the social movement want to persuade the most public to believe in their illiberal values, and we do not want to confuse the public about what we are actually doing. Because we want to promote the feminism value without hurting the men. We want to promote the white and men, the race equality, not by attacking the white people. We want to promote the gay rights movement by not harming the other social group. So we believe what we are doing is actually legitimate and by remaining in the status quo, we will allow no doxing, we are actually provide the identity and the image of social movement, and therefore the advancement will actually come true under our paradigm.
Thank the Deputy Prime Minister and invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to continue the debate.
Mr. Madam Speaker, ultimately, social movement is all about persuading the people in the middle ground, persuading the people in the silent majority. So let's be fair. When the government side argues that then we need actually to do about logic and persuasion, and our side is arguing that we need to actually go for doxing, in other words, sensationalization, the fact that they need to prove in this debate is why these people, especially logic and persuasion, is very principally justified, and how the mechanism actually happens in this debate. We think that whole opening government, two speakers, never proved a clear mechanism whatsoever, so that's the fundamental reason why we think they're out in this debate. But even if that was the case, I'm going to engage with all their materials and take their best case scenario and probably preempt what closing government is going to argue, and I'm going to say why opening opposition must be prioritized in this debate. So I'm going to further extend it upon this debate by giving you further principled reasons as to why we think, not to mention my leader of opposition's argumentation about principles of what is progressive movement. I'm going to further add on why even in the liberal democratic society, especially freedom of speech itself should be respected, and I'm going to give you a comparative here. And second, I'm also going to talk about the people who need to be protected, especially minorities. I'm going to explain practicalities here. But before I move on to all these issues, let me engage with a whole chunk of idea of privacy and all sorts of clashes. So first, about the privacy issue. We think that the reason why opening government can never win this clash, Mr. Madam Speaker, is that they never prove why the privacy itself should be prioritized and must be the biggest burden to these liberal progressive movements in the very first place. When I ask them at POI, then why that these liberal progressive movements need to necessarily have huge burden of being progressive, and they need to actually take care of not being violence of these ideas. They never gave us response and just simply dismissed our question and just simply say it is different from conservative movement. I'm going to give you responses here. We think in democratic society it is fine. When it comes to freedom of speech, conservative people already do uses their freedom to actually look at the Donald Trump when he actually uses the rhetoric on Twitter to actually show his opinion about these minorities and Rust Belt actors and these things. We think that is already principally justified. Then why not this liberal movement actually utilizing media platform and making people persuasion? They never gave us any comparative here, so we think that that's the fundamental reason why they even lose this in principal reasons. But even if let's take it at their best and accept the privacy issue. If your only apprehension is the privacy issue, then fair enough. If it was about defamation issue, we are happy to go for legal procedure, but this is not the crux of this debate. Let's talk about why even in the privacy issue, why we think that these people are justified. We told you when it comes to liberal movement and these actions, these people need to actually persuade the silent majority. In other words, we think that in terms of actually revealing this factual information, it is something that compromisable factor actually happening in democratic society. That is to say, we think that to a certain extent, regardless your progressive movement, regardless conservative movement, it is already happening that you, to a certain extent, revealing your information. For example, your politician's name, for example, your family information, for example, your actually children having all these issues. And adding on that, we think that these people's morality, and not only the political platform, should be also added in order for actually people to know about it. We think that is principally justified enough to win our clash. Second of all, even if we think that is harming these privacy issues, we think that the thing we need to prioritize is the minorities, especially when the LGBTQ people and the feminist feminist people are actually suffering and systematically disenfranchising the status quo. We think that minorities need to be protected by making much more public. Why? Because we think that liberal progressive movement are actually stuck in the status quo. In other words, you are actually arguing for a public platform, and these ideas are actually swaying in these people to make numb. In other words, they do not feel any stimulus to actually go for to support this public movement. In order to that, we told you we need to actually use sensationalization method. In other words, using the media such as Facebook and Twitter, and let people know. We think that's completely fine under our paradigm. We already gave an example about the Hollywood actor #MeToo movement. To further add on, we think that feminist movement and these women who are disenfranchised by sexual assault, such as C.K. Lewis and Harvard Spencer, who actually done the public masturbation in the current status quo, we think that these people will be severely criticized under our side of house only because these people now take the interest because the media actually works. And when you think about the media's characterization, it is very fast and it is actually spread towards information. So even if, let's bite the bullet, even if there's a spread of information, we think that ultimately becomes a much more counter narrative under our side of house because now we have much more power to actually numerically fight against these conservative bigots and neo-Nazis and alt-right movement coming from your side of house. So that's exactly the reason why we think the opening government never explained any kind of mechanism. That's the reason why they fundamentally fail. And about further adding minor rebuttals, about the logic and persuasion, the reason why OG even fails in this characterization, even if it take all their best case scenario, we think that logic and persuasion is already mutually exclusive coming from our side of house. In other words, we think that the logic and persuasion, such as Hillary Clinton, who ran for presidency in last 2016, she already used her public platform, and just adding on that, opening opposition is further adding on why the doxing itself should be something we should be principally justified to go for. Why? Because we think that that is something that you sensationalize public, and the public actually now understand why the current narrative and current dialogue and conversation is really stuck. We need to break the deadlock and actually make people attention. And even if maybe closing a government may ask, we will just simply stay there, we are happy for that because now you have a much more numerical number of people, then you can actually more focus on people's interest, then you can actually more focus step by step to go on the public platform and policies whatsoever. Just because you think that just because you have all these public platform and logic does not make the necessary conclusion that these people are always justified. Then you need to give comparative why your case is just something always justified. If any questions, I'll take proceed. If no, I'll move on to. So moving on to my further extensions, we think that there is a further benefit about why it necessarily is a big harm. As I told you in the whole responses, we think that even if it goes beyond the law, we are actually already the legal system exists in terms of defamation law, so we don't necessarily think that there is a big issue. Furthermore, we think that in terms of mechanism, the reason why general public actually now has much more stimulus is because that currently the silent majority are actually living the mannerism. In other words, these people actually do not understand why these liberals are just simply making these such policies such as maybe welfare policies for minorities or LGBTQ or maybe for immigrants. In order for them to understand, they need to be exposed to media. Then why is it very effective? We think that the media itself actually has much more power and the public can easily access to these information. So given that, even all these harms coming from their side of house, we think that the public can at least decide why these things are important. Why? Because we don't necessarily think the public are always idiots. They do have their own rationale. So we think that even if some public may get out from even our worst case scenario, we think that even it is still good because we at least increases the numerical number of people to actually pay attention to it. So we think that by having that counter narrative, it ultimately shackles down the skewed playground, which is set by the conservative bigots. So we think that it is at least better for these minorities to actually have much more public power support from these numerical number of people. Therefore, the conclusion of this argument, by linking this motion, Mr. Madam Speaker, is the fact that why doxing movement should go for it. We told you the doxing itself should be actually not something which the liberals should be abandoned. It's because the liberals also do have the interest to care for these minorities, and we think that in order to do that, sensationalization and appealing to public is something that logically was also allowed in terms of the liberal democratic society. For all these reasons, why we finally told you for opening opposition. We told you, in terms of principle level and practicality level, we want this opening government by landslide, and we want closing government to engage with our case. We are happy to oppose the motion.
Thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for that speech, and I invite the Member of Government to extend the debate.
ladies and gentlemen, we believe today's debate is very confusing. The entire upper house, they engage with each other, and we say that is very confusing for us to digest in a short moment. And I have to say, like, the material brought by CG will be entirely different from that of the entire upper house. Okay, so before coming to my extensions, I'm going to engage with the case provided by OO. Like, basically, OO said, well, they need to prove us why doxing is the only way to increase the so-called middle ground between the liberal and conservative. But it is their burden to prove that why it is the only way. Our burden is to prove to you why it causes more harm than good to do that. But yes, we have brought to you many alternatives, such as the profile, stories, opinions in newspaper and magazines, and we think this can give them a public discourse which is logical and very neutral for them to debate and to find their middle ground. And I think the burden on their side is to burden on our side is to prove that this does more harm than good. Our upper house has already proved to you why this will discredit the legitimacy of progressive movements, and we will going to further prove to you why this kind of doxing will inherently hinder the process of judicial cases in today's society. So coming to our substantive, I'm going to first argument is that we think by using the doxing, this will hinder the judicial process and thus pervert justice. Why do I say so? How is the case? We believe by using this kind of doxing, this kind of liberal and so-called progressive movements, they will use the social media exposure, and they will use the public discourse and to distort the justice procedure. Why? Because they can entrench the public animosity toward the suspect. And we think the most cases in this kind of society, a lot of liberal progressions and movements, they involve in a lot of criminal justice, criminal cases, and that's why when they choose a side, they want to push their kind of they want to take a side between the judicial results, and the reason, the consequence is that the general public will be emotionally kidnapped by this kind of doxing. For example, if a man raped a child, but his other behaviors other than this kind of rape is relevant to his kind of behavior, but once this liberal progression, such as feminist movement, they by means of doxing, they kind of know that, well, this man, he has publicly assaulted women, and they will use this as a leverage against the judicial process, and by consequence of this, the jury and the judge will be heavily influenced by this kind of information leaked by this kind of irrelevant doxing. So we think, based on this, we think this will lead to bad results of the judicial consequence, and this will pervert justice, and it will hinder the social progress at the end of the day. No, thank you. So why this is very important compared to the entire case provided by Upper House? Upper House mainly talk about, well, we need to increase the middle ground between the liberals and the conservatives. Yes, as the closing government, we agree, but we think that the more urgent problem here we face is that in a lot of judicial cases, we met the involvement of the illicit information provided by means of doxing is heavily hinders the just result. So we think this is more important, and two reasons why this case. Okay, the second reason is why is that this will also to decrease the credibility of the progressive movement in itself, because it is the progressive movements, they use this kind of technique, this kind of doxing to approach this kind of information, and they by the means of media they expose to the general public, and they let this kind of entire judicial process heavily hindered. Go.
We told you that these extreme conservatives that you are talking about actually bash up those liberal ideas, and we told you the only mechanism is to prevent those kind of extreme comments. We told you your best case is at least punitive and mitigatory. You need to engage with that point.
Okay, basically, I don't see like why this doxing is doxing is the only way to do so. We have a lot of ways to do so, but you need to prove us why this is the only way. Like as soon as we can prove that it does more harm than good, it like delegitimizes the social progression movement, and it can perverse justice. And we think like as soon as we prove that does more harm than good, like we think that our burden is fully fulfilled, and we think. And we think the second argument we think second argument from the CG is that we think this will set the doxing behavior caused by this kind of social progression movement will set a bad example for the society, and therefore will cause social turmoil and increases and further splits the common ground between the liberals and conservatives. Why is that the case? We believe that by doing so, you kind of use an illegitimate means to achieve so-called very good ends. But we think here the means does more harm than the positive result you can achieve of this kind of legitimate end. So we think based on this, we think if you do this your opponents, the so-called conservatives, they will use this the same way against you, and will cause a further backlash, and they will trigger a sort of internet war, WeChat war, or a Facebook war towards each other. And we think this will further split the society, will cause more social division than unity. Based on this, we're very proud to oppose.
Thank the member of opposition, or member of government, and invite the member of opposition to extend.
Madam Chair, I'm going to end this once and for all, okay? So, the current status quo is, as O mentions, is that de facto violence is happening from the majority to the minority.
Here.
We can see this being the case when there's Trayvon Martin getting killed. When we see Tamar getting shot, you know. We see so many minorities every day facing violence, living in a state of fear in the cases of the United States when there are certain types of things, and these things that government deems to be wrong, de facto happening in the status quo. When that is the case, telling the progressive movements to get rid of their own tool as a mechanism is something very, very harmful, or something very, very illegitimate, we think. And that is the reason as to why that settles everything said by all the three houses, okay? But we're going to go into our extension, which is precisely why privacy must be breached in order to stop the actualization of these movements. But secondly, we're going to talk about why this empowers the progressive movements. This isn't really necessarily about making the moderates come to the progressive movements or whatnot, but rather about why within even these progressive movements, why they were so soft, why they were so lackluster, but rather why this new narrative of extremism, that they're not particularly going to succumb to the idea of a majority, is something so important that other people are not going to view these minorities as something weak, as somebody that is liable, that is somebody malleable at the end of the day. So number one, how do extreme actions happen, or how do extreme ideas form? And why does privacy must be breached? We think that identity and incentives of these extremist individuals must be considered. For example, we think that those individuals, for example, those people who attended the white supremacist march at Charlottesville, are precisely forming their identity via people that they know, via their backgrounds and by their backgrounds, by their internet communities or whatnot. We think that those kind of things all share one thing in common. that they're anonymous and that they're communitarian. As in, number one, we think that the privacy, when it comes to these places like internet communities, like the Clam or Breitbart, or like your offline community with your friends, is something essentially anonymous. As in, nobody else knows what you're doing. We think that because this is the case, people have more agency, but in a negative way, to do whatever they want. We think that this is something very bad, because we think that when this is the case, this is more likely due to the verification culture that exists within these online communities, and due to the idea of like communitarian saying that you should do it, or like we're going to support you no matter what you do, no matter how morally culpable you are. We think that those kind of ideas prompts these individuals to actually actualize these things of identity attacks, telling these people to actively discriminate these minorities, telling them wetbacks to go back to Mexico, or like these kind of things to actually happen at the end of the day. No, thank you. But secondly, we think that communitarian value also makes individuals like in a very private realm, like when we crack jokes of like these individuals, those kind of privacy actually makes these individuals like confirm and reaffirm their identity as that extremist individual. No, thank you. Therefore, the only way to get rid of this is to break down the mechanism of privacy that exists in these communities. What are the backlashes when you get yes you're racist Twitter, when you're mentioned at the yes you're racist Twitter? We think that these individuals will actively lose jobs. We think that these individuals will actively lose their friends, and people will be disappointed. He will be further stigmatized. We think that this is a good thing. No, thank you. Why? Because first of all, we think that this puts them finally at the first time, for the very first time, as a majority extremist individual to be in a direct stakeholdership. As in, something that I do, something as pervasive as discrimination, should be something that I could be culpable of by this doxing movement. But secondly, we think that this also changes the perception of the progressive movement, and I'm going to mention that later. Yes?
So we are not banning any individual from their freedom of speech, from their freedom of expression, something that they're unsatisfied with. So why do you think it's actually relevant to the motion that we should ban a progressive movement is rather?
The problem is, OO already answers this.
Sure.
De jure, we are all banning this, we're all letting these individuals not to do these things. De facto, these violences are happening every day in our lives, right? Which is the reason as to why, in order to bridge the gap, we see the de facto reaction of mirroring needs to happen in order for these individuals to feel direct stakeholdership, so that these individuals will be deterred from actualizing their deeds, their identity that they have been forming through the medium of privacy. Therefore, number two, why moral agency is so important. We think that name shaming and identity attacks exist in the first place. We think that progressive movements needs to have an arsenal to balance the power. As in order for the moral agency of these movements to be really restored, we need these individuals to notice that there is various choices. Therefore, when we think that it is one thing for you to have a choice of being very, very violent, or being very, very retaliatory to these individuals, and also having a choice of peaceful protest, compared to you only being told that you must be peaceful when you're trying to ascribe for a social movement. We think that when you do have that agency, when you do have that choice as a social movement, finally you're able to make that choice, which greatly empowers them. Because we think that that moral agency of you choosing a method, and you finally deriving a justification as to why you're choosing that method, could finally be there from that minority group, or from that progressive movement. We think that because that justification, because their conviction as to why they're doing it must be empowered when they have that agency, we would like that tool to exist in the status quo, not actually letting these people support these, actually having a faction of people supporting these kind of ideas, even though they might be violent or whatnot. We think that that is something that we want to have at the end of the day. We think that Gandhi was able to, or Martin Luther King was able to have a moral high ground compared to Malcolm X, because Malcolm X, there was a choice among Black Panthers or these more moderate movements. And when these people went to the moderate movements, we think that these people were able to assume that moral high ground. We think that that in and of itself is very important when it comes to empowering that social movement. Therefore, we think that by the end of the day, privacy is the reason as to why these individuals are actively attacking the identity of these individuals. We have also told you that de facto, these things are happening. And we need to. There is no way in order to solve it de jure, because the de jure already exists, but it isn't working. We say that there needs to be a change in perception of these social movements, that these are not weak individuals, but rather strong people that are willing to take a stand on their ideas. Very proud to host.
Thank the member of opposition for that speech, and invite the government whip to continue the debate.
Very good.
Under the so-called justification of the whole opposition bench, we say that this kind of doxing can be used as a bi-directional weapon that used by both this extreme conservative groups as well as those so-called labor groups. Because under their justification, it can be easily turned out into a justification of this or of the other side. They can also doxing about someone in your labor group, right? So we think that by legitimate this kind of doxing group, it is the two-sided harm rather than your own description. And also, we're very sorry that the lower house failed to engage with my partner about our new provided issue. About the most important thing is that it could raise a potential to hinder our current judicial system. But before that, some comparatives. The first thing is a principle issue. Like we see that the opposition bench have also they demonstrated a way like this. Firstly, democracy can be directly lead to justified, because in a world of democracy, people's right, freedom of speech can be justified. But we see that in terms of doxing, this is still doubted, because even though later you kind of combine this doxing to your own disfranchisement and something, but we still think in our society we don't regard people somehow as, we don't categorize them as such universal standard should be deemed as identical. And then they kind of equalize this doxing with revelation. But we say that doxing is something that is targeted on some individual, on someone who which not only dig out his own personal profile, as well as his family's background, and as well as his past wrongdoing, which is irrelevant to the game, to the aim or the goal of your liberal or your progressive movement. Because your progressive movement must have a theme, must have an aim, but your doxing this kind of thing is to dig out something rather than your aim. You're trying to divert people from this very aim to hoax their man side to turn against them. So I think that this equalization between these two words can be felt, because we say that you cannot thus commonize or rationalize this doxing wrongdoing is real by your demonstration. And also, you also mentioned that the kind of de facto harm that being implemented on the minority groups. And yes, we agree on that. But you mean the disenfranchisement, can this directly lead to that, the personal attack? Because yes, you can state your idea that how you get harmed, and you can use whatever rhetorics to say that you are actually, this disfranchisement is that harmful. But we see that for this progressive movement, as I mentioned, by doxing on someone or whoever that person is important or something, the only thing you can get is by that group of people, they use the same method against you, because we say that you cannot always ensure that in your group you do not have some member who does have a black background, and someday this kind of method will be utilized by themselves, and this will lead to more chaos into the whole society later. And now, next we see that whether this method is that unique and that powerful that there's actually no alternatives. Of course not. So about the uniqueness and the opposition mentioned that they can bring out the attention of the middle ground or the public, and to help these people kind of fit into their paradigm, to fit into their interest. But we see that this is kind of utilizing people's mindset of gossiping, right? Because you kind of bring out one's like black background or something. People cannot really focus on your aim, because doxing. I want to reiterate this term, doxing. It doesn't mean that you will elaborate more on your aim, but there's something bad on that individual. So we see that by manipulating in your ways, by manipulating the will of the people, you can see that, as my partner has mentioned, this can lead to great troubles. The reason why is that by doing things, by the progress of this kind of progressive movement, by the clashes of many sides. Sorry, later. Clashes of many sides. We see that some legal procedures is inevitable, right? So someone, because you kind of reveal some of his wrongdoings, maybe you can relate it to some crimes. And we see that by doxing on this person and by swaying the public will on that person, you kind of swaying the public will that divert their basic attention on the crime itself. But on minds of people, all they occur to their minds is some ridiculous wrongdoing that make them hate that people out of some other reasons that is quite irrelevant to neither your goal of the movement, nor the procedure of the judicial court. So it's that is really problematic in terms of today's debate. And secondly, the opposition, and they mentioned that the public are always rational, they can pick the right side. But really, but is that so? I highly doubt it, because there's a million of cases that can be introduced into this kind of thing. Because internet violence or some other populist people wills violence can actually murder people. So we see that even though you kind of depict that conservative groups are really true demons, but we see them as human beings, and you and I, they have loving families to raise, they're gonna have a life to live. So based on that, proud to
Thank the member of government. And we'll stop the camera now and then invite the member of opposition to close the debate.
Yeah.
Here.